Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everyone.
Good morning, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. Happy Thursday. My name is Armin Kakas, partner at Revology, which is a pricing and RGM consultancy for mid-market. We're a full end-to-end pricing and RGM focused advisory firm, and one of the co-founders of Revify, which Enrico will talk about. Based out of Charlotte, and just took a red eye from Seattle, so you'll see me drink my espresso while I'm speaking. But thank you for joining.
Need some caffeine to get going, right?
Yep.
Hey everyone, I'm Enrico Sieni, partner with Revology with Armin and co-founder of Revify Analytics with Armin as well. And Revify, if you know the company, is a fairly new company that is focused on the mid-market, especially manufacturers and distributors. So we focus on companies that are $10 million to about $1 billion in revenue and help solve for them problems where they are lacking a pricing team or a data science team. And so Revify brings solutions to those type of organizations that want to progress on pricing and profitability, but don't really have the means to afford a full-fledged team or expensive softwares.
Perfect. All right, let me just talk about the agenda. We'll go through the first section real quick, just because I think the interesting part is really the playbook, which Enrico will talk about. And these are best practices that we've been using with clients and that we've advised clients to build in their own business. We see more and more mid-market firms starting to use AI, and they're going beyond Copilot into Cloud Enterprise and things like that. So the playbook will be really interesting. The second brain will be really interesting, but we'll talk about the opportunity and the kind of the realities of commercial workforces, right? We'll talk about why you actually need a true commercial intelligence system with a digital brain or a second brain, which I'll elaborate on. Enrico talks about the playbook, which I talked about. We'll go through a real example, right? It's a fictitious company, but in that sense, it's
a real company with sanitized data.
It's a real company with sanitized and anonymized data, right? It's a platform that we built for them. They're using every day. And then we'll just talk about some housekeeping guidance. But let's talk about maybe slide 4, Enrico, if you don't mind. Yeah, the next slide. Yeah, so we hear this from CEOs of mid-market companies, lots of pressure from the board to use AI more and more in their organizations, right? And I think the prevalent thought process now is going to be a sort of an SG&A saving capability, right? And it is not the case just yet, right? And I think lots of companies want to do AI. Lots of companies are investing in AI. It's operating like a proof of concept, but this big capability gap that we're seeing between kind of these POC type activities and actually companies and employees who have a workflow mindset with AI, that gap is just widening, right? And that's what we're seeing. I think, quite frankly, that's partly why I think consultants still have a job and will have a job for the next decade or so, right? That's maybe one of the reasons. There's some other ones, obviously, as well. But that gap is widening, and we'll talk about what that means to close that gap, right? And then the second piece is when I see commercial teams, and we just visited a phenomenal CPG client with just excellent people in their sales and marketing and just commercial teams, but they're over capacity, right? They don't have all the headcount that they need, and they're also tasked to do just a lot of stuff with a fairly static headcount, right? So how do you take advantage of AI to actually be truly productive and helps accelerate the daily stuff that you have to do and the weekly and the monthly reviews, et cetera, et cetera? And how do you free up that time that you spend on data munging and analysis and insights to have AI do it? So now you're focusing more on strategy and execution, right? Next slide, Enrico. Yeah, so this is, I think, common for most of you guys. It's a different surveys produce different set of numbers, but they're all in the same ballpark, which is only about 20 to 30% of a sales rep's time is actually spent on selling, right? Lots of administrative stuff, lots of updating the numbers and whatever CRM you're using or whatever planning tool you're using, right? And so AI can actually help accelerate a lot of that, right? A lot of the account research and meeting preps and creating proposals and maybe doing some discounting proposals for a lot of these B2B deals, right? AI can actually help accelerate that. As we look at this number, and if companies are using AI the right way, I would expect this number to go up substantially, right? Obviously, the proof is going to be out there in a couple of years, but this number definitely needs to improve. If you don't mind, go, yeah, the next slide. Yeah, so I think most people still use AI in companies for the stuff on the left side, right? It's great to summarize information and documents and craft emails and write articles, and it's even good at classification, right? So if you feed it a bunch of data of your customers, both kind of firmographic data and transactional data, it does a really good job of classifying them, right? And also does a pretty good job of forecasting. I would say AI is really good at that. The issue that we're seeing with, I would say, most companies, if not all in the mid-market space, is you have disconnected data. You have one system for internal transactional data. You have another system for syndicated data. You may have another system for inventory and whatever else, right? And you may have a fourth system for promotions. If you don't have the data integrated, harmonized, deduplicated, quality checked, you're going to deal with bad, very siloed data, and AI is not going to have, at least the current versions of AI is going to have a really tough time giving you accurate numbers, right? Context is important, right? As more and more people start using AI in companies, right? And this is already happening without AI, but imagining 5 people doing the same analysis. Now you have different contexts. They may be pinging different databases or different files in the shared folder. They have different definitions of, let's say, promotional ROI or distributor profitability, right? So now all of a sudden you have 5 people doing the same exercise with AI, getting 5 different answers. Next thing you're spending 15, 20 hours a week trying to reconcile those things. And we're already seeing that in companies, by the way, right? And so that's going to yield the opposite of what companies are trying to do with AI, right? And of course, things like change management and adoption. Imagine creating some AI workflow or some AI-driven tool. It's worthless unless there's adoption, unless it's incorporated into your weekly, monthly operating review. And ideally, that weekly, monthly operating review and some of those KPIs that you're trying to hit through the use of AI augmented solutions, ideally that's part of your incentive, right? And that's probably the easiest way to achieve change management. Yeah, we can go to the next one. I'll just talk real briefly, but obviously the saving grace for most of us is AI is really good at finding patterns and drafting letters, but obviously we still need to do the strategy and the execution and building relationships, right? And figuring out whether the recommendations for certain prices and discounts, are they pragmatic? Are they in line with the marketplace and the particular customer they were dealing with, right? And so you still need sort of the human element for not just decision making, but certainly for execution, and then for the closed loop monitoring. Okay, this is what we said we're going to do. Did we actually achieve that? We still need commercial leaders to do that. And then maybe the last piece on the next slide, Enrico, is this whole concept of AI as a co-pilot, right? Which most people still use AI as a digital assistant type setup, which we talked about, versus AI as a full end-to-end commercial intelligence, right? So it relies on integrated, harmonized data between your internal and external systems, right? It uses your transactional data. It has your CRM data embedded, right? Ideally, it has some other context embedded around transcripts from customer calls or transcripts from sales reviews, et cetera, et cetera. But that's what gives it the right context for the AI to operate effectively. And we'll tell you what that is. But I just want to emphasize that that's really where AI needs to operate in companies. Enrico will talk about the playbooks, like how to actually use AI for certain domain things that you need to achieve when it comes to pricing, RGM, and commercial optimization. And then I'll talk about the digital brain. How do you actually set up a second brain in your company? Like very tactically, what do you need to do to set up a second brain so that your AI operates at a much higher level than it currently is? Okay, so I'll turn it over to Enrico.
Perfect. Thanks, Armin. So let's talk about the playbook. But before we go there, at the bottom of the page, a huge disclaimer, right? I'm going to read it out because it's so important. Never use the sensitive company data with a personal AI subscription, right? It's really important that you maintain control of that domain. This is the biggest concern that we see IT departments having, is people taking loads of confidential company data and then uploading it outside of the server in the boundary of the company. A good reminder for everyone to keep a close eye on that. What we'll cover today, as Armin mentioned, is the playbooks, right? So that's the biggest promise that we made you for this session. You're going to see roughly 15 of them. They're going to be very detailed. These are going to be prompts that you can use straight away in your own AI tool of choice. So we're not going to go through a lot of detail. The good news is that after the webinar, we're going to be sending all this material to you. So you'll be able to copy and paste in your AI assistant. And we'll just give you a flavor for why the prompts that we designed are the way they are and a couple of call outs so that you can think about what's key that you train AI doing in order to get the best outcomes. You'll see all these plays organized around two main quadrants, right? Two main axes. The first one at the top is the life cycle, right? So finding your best accounts, the winning them, growing them, keeping them. And then at the bottom of each slide, you'd also find three maturity levels. Level one is that a generic AI assistant that you can start immediately. Level two is when you start connecting AI with your CRM and your ERP. And then level three is what we created with Revify as a platform that really finds, prioritizes, and runs repeatable plays, right? The repeatability is the key. Can ChatGPT do this for free if you have it as embedded in your organization? Yes, but typically at level one. And so the level differs in what AI knows about your business and how well it can apply the context. And every play card that will show you the progression between level 1, 2, and 3, and the actual prompt that will take you through. So again, all of this is going to be in your inbox. If you have questions along the way, this is interactive, so please feel free to just put your question in the Q&A section of the call. So let's get going. So stage one is the find portion. And so stage one is really around the three main areas of finding. You're finding your next best accounts. And so you're looking for prospect scoring profiles that are similar to the top accounts that you already have. And the trigger-based prospecting is really looking for buying signals, new facilities being built, hiring searchers, so any other type of indication that you may have a potential customer appearing on the radar screen. And then the last one is the white space, which basically shows where you're underpenetrated by territory and or by vertical. And along all of these, there's always a pricing thread. And that means which prospects really resemble your highest margin customer and not necessarily your biggest ones. Everyone tends to score just on revenue, but very few people score on expected margin. And so if you reframe that conversation, it gives you a much better target list for your reps to start calling next week. So let's get going on each of the plays. So this is the familiar layout of the slides. You see the prompt very detailed on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, it will give you the suggested information that you paste in your AI window, what you're going to be getting, and a few watch outs. And you'll see the same pattern for all the plays. So you paste in your 20 high gross margin accounts and a prospect export, and it scores each prospect 0 to 100 on resemblance, weighing margin predictive traits over company size. And there's two main instructions that carry the whole play. First of all, as I mentioned before, you rank by expected margin, not by revenue. And that line obviously changes who gets called on. And the second one is telling the model if it's allowed to say insufficient data, because as one of the potential drawbacks of models is that they start guessing. And so this actually kills hallucination scores. And at the same time, we always suggest that you sanity check at least the top 10 outputs by hand before you pass it on to the rest of your team. So this is the prospecting. The next one is the trigger-based. So the AI scans public signals for your territory list and then returns account, signal, date, and source link with an outreach angle and an urgency around it. So the citation rule is basically the whole slide. It only signals the signals that it can cite, and no signal found is a valid answer. Very often AIs try to avoid not giving you not found. You actually want to push the model to tell you where it doesn't find information rather than just create it. Because if you're using data that has been created and is not real, that's the quickest way for a rep to lose complete credibility in front of the customer. And the next play is a white space mapping. So you upload 24 months of sales by customer in category, and it basically finds where similar customers by categories this sell under indexes on with dollar upside and the name accounts around it. There's two guardrails. The model must show its benchmark logic. So why is it recommending the upside that it's giving you? And it must check the trend. because very often lost business masquerades as white space, but it's a different bucket of customers, right? Customers that are lost require a different type of approach than just a white space mapping, okay? So let me carry on. Again, I promise you it's going to be quick. What this changes, you're going from hours to minutes and then from gut feel to score this. This is the whole premise of using AI to be able to A, accelerate the cycle time it takes you to go through these analyses, but B, also become a lot more data-based and be able to substantiate with your team why you're making the recommendations that you're making. Stage 2, this is about the win. And again, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the appropriate box. The win is about converting the customers, right? This is where the reps feel AI first, because briefs and proposals are the highest friction artifacts typically in their week. And so we have 4 plays we recommend here: the pre-call preparation, the vertical tailor outreach, the first draft proposals, and then objection prep, which you can also use for onboarding new reps to your industry. And again, the key question underlying the pricing angle is, what is the initial price most likely to win the account and maximize lifetime value, right? So that's something that we always want to keep the reps at the back of the mind and avoid them over discounting just to win that customer or that first order. On the pre-call brief, what this does is compresses typically a 90-minute research ritual that reps have before they go into an account, at least for the better reps that we've seen in our careers, where they take the time to do that. And there's a couple of craft details here as well. The key question here is, how do you allow AI to create a question, right? For example, you may ask, how are you handling the new regulation? That comes across as a curious request from a rep, instead of a rep acting as a know-it-all with a printout and going in and stating something that the customer knows very well. Again, being able to tease out what the customer needs is important, and being able to generate what type of questions the rep can ask the customer gives them a leg up. In addition to this, the idea is to provide verify on call, because you don't want a rep going overly confident with a statement in the customer if it's not really clear or if it's not certain. So the ability to be able to point out to a rep which questions to ask and verify with the customer is powerful, because it's a great conversation starter. The next one is the first draft proposal. Vertical tailor outreach. The vertical tailor outreach is basically a first touch the operator actually uses, and you use it as a trigger to put a potential customer on your list. So the idea is to get signal, right? And so what are the typical KPIs that would allow a customer or a potential customer to get on your radar screen, and be able to fact checks with AI to determine if those KPI are actually valid and they signal a potential customer interest in your company and your products or your services. Again, the KPI refinement is really key here, because of course you don't want to spend reps time chasing accounts that are very unlikely to buy from you because they're not interested in your offering or your services to start with. The next one is the first draft proposal. And Armin and I have seen already a lot of people using RFPs, either that they've received from the procurement side or that they're generating from the sales side being used. So this is one of the typical areas of AI that we see used a lot already today. The key here is the confirm flags, right? So the watch out here is it's very easy to create a draft, but the key thing is, number one, confirming that all the customer needs and requests have been covered by the proposal that is put together. And then secondly, also injecting boundaries that you can flag if they are breached. And so from a pricing perspective, this is an excellent way of being able to implement and enforce below floor pricing, so that the system can help you determine what is allowed and what is not allowed, or what requires additional review. Okay, so again, you can start automating some of these rules within the organization instead of chasing your tails, looking at outliers over and over. The next one is the objective prep. And this is an area that not a lot of companies are using already today, which is basically using AI as a sparring partner. And so the idea here is the AI plays your skeptical purchasing director or customer and objects one at a time, waiting for your answer, and then critiques the quality of your answer based on your empathy and how specific you are and how well you're controlling the conversation. So it's a great training mechanism for reps, and it's something that some best companies are doing as well, are using it for onboarding new reps to be able to get them thinking about, hey, this is the typical concerns and pushbacks you will get from customers in a specific industry. Okay. So lastly, what changes with the win? Again, huge time savers, as you can imagine, and obviously the accuracy of the output increases, right? Especially with the proposals. I'm sure all of you on the call have looked at endless amount of proposals, either because you're on receiving end or you're generating them. There's always mistakes. There's always legal reviews that catch things that shouldn't be there or should be reworded. Again, AI is a great way of being able to improve the cycle time and the accuracy of those reports. All right. Again, I promise you it's going to be fast, but you're going to get all this in your inbox. Stage 3 is about growing, so expanding the business that you already have. We have 4 plays we recommend here. One is a quarterly business review prep, and so being able to assemble reviews that you can use with your customer to gauge and to present the value that you're offering to the customer as part of your service or your products. The second one is deal desk management related. The third is around cross-selling idea generation. And the last one is around price increase plays. Again, the pricing thread here is where do you have opportunities to grow your business, which could be either by getting more business and or getting more price. Again, we'll go through each of these individually. The QBR prep basically turns what we've historically seen a couple of days of analyst work in under an hour. You upload the transactions to the account and the price book, and then it basically builds up the pack. So it will look at the margin trend, it will decompose your value, your volume, your price, your cost and mix. And so you'll be able to look at your price realization, and you'll get talking points ranked by dollar impact. One habit to have is always make sure that the decomposition works, right? Any waterfall that doesn't reconcile to the actual numbers just becomes a story and really becomes a credibility issue. So always double check the output of the calculations. The next one is the deal desk memo. So this is I would say, a very boring part of many teams, but every single discount request should really get a one-page memo the same day it's get requested, right? So the requested versus the pocket margin, showing the math, where does your price land in your realized price band, the relationship full account value. There's a bunch of information that any type of deal desk memo should include and that you can extract from a CRM. But the idea is to be able to look at things by margin and looking at all the different concessions that you're already giving to a specific customer, for example, freight and terms and rebates and so on, before you give any additional pricing concessions, right? And the beauty of this is that if you then collect both the inputs in terms of why someone is requesting a deal desk margin concession, and also the reason why it got approved or it got rejected, again, this is all part of the second brain that Armin will talk about that will create a tremendous amount of information that you can keep on making AI smarter and smarter to be able to automate these processes. So very key part of the process. Cross-sell. So cross-sell should be really grounded in your own data, right? So you can allow AI to run elasticity and machine learning models to be able to create affinity. And basically it will tell you, hey, people that buy safety gloves likely also buy safety glasses, right? And so your transaction file of all your customer and product information enables you to cross-pollinate these and be able to give the reps an idea of which SKUs to lead the conversation on and which type of products are a customer more likely to buy if they're not already buying them from you. All right, price increase, my favorite, right? So the idea around the price increase plays, you upload again the account history, the cost inflation tied to your price books, and then it actually drafts the customer letter. So the idea is if you are using this appropriately, you should be able to generate individualized, targeted customer letters for each customer rather than the standard letter that most companies send out today, which in some cases apply or don't apply to customers, and also create a talk track for the rep, including the top 3 pushbacks that they're probably going to be receiving from that specific customer. Okay. Again, very powerful, but it's very important that you vet the outputs right before you send it out to the reps, because there's nothing worse than a rep going in front of customer and getting embarrassed because they're walking in with incorrect data that either doesn't tie to the story or doesn't tie to the price increase information that the customer will receive in their own ERP. So again, also here, productivity improvements and of course, accuracy. And the whole idea around the grow is that you should be able to see increases in sales and increases in profit, ideally, at the same time. All right, last playbook. I know this is a whirlwind. So the idea behind keep is basically the maintaining your existing customers, right? Protecting their customers that are at risk. And so this is where you can use voice of the customer synthesis. So you can generate tickets, notes, and emails. You have win-back sequences for customers that you have lost. You can dramatically expedite service replies by being able to detect type of requests that are more common. And then you can also use a predictive aspect and so have churn early warning signals depending on what the customer is doing compared to peer customers. And again, from a pricing side, the typical concern is customer churn tends to increase when you have certain triggers. It could be a price increase, it could be a reorganization of the sales team. But again, those are perfect times to be able to have this type of AI tools in place to prevent churn in the first place. So the first one is voice of the customer synthesis. So the idea is to be able to dump in all your quarterly tickets from the customer, call summaries, rep notes. The most important part is being able to consolidate all this rich data in one place so that you can actually have AI parse through it, which, as Armin mentioned before, it does extremely well. And then be able to come up with themes that are ranked by frequency and severity with quotes as well. Because the reality is, when you're in front of a board or an executive team, if you just have informational data without any specific quotes, sometimes it becomes more of a story or anecdotal versus actual hard-hitting facts and being able to justify what customers are telling you and why the organization needs to improve in certain areas. So there's 2 main rules. Severity matters as much as frequency, because AI's default approach is to count, and counting one very large account as the same as many small accounts that are very little compared to the grand scheme is not the right way of approaching it, right? So overweighing on count is what AI will typically tend to do. You want to balance count with severity or importance so that you can have a blended approach. So the prompt itself forbids averaging away outliers as well, so that you don't consolidate all around what are the biggest volumes or the biggest counts of issues that I'm encountering. And then the verbatim quotes actually allows you to be able to track back to say, this is exactly what the customer has been telling us. And this is why collecting call information, transcripts, and emails is important to be able to get the true voice of the customer. The next one is around win-back experience, right? So this is about starting with a diagnosis of what happened and not with a discount. What Armin and I typically have seen in customers is that there's a knee-jerk reaction whenever a customer is lost to go back and immediately give a price concession instead of reading the history and diagnosing what was the trigger that led that customer to go away, right? It could have been a price event, but in reality, very often it could have been a service failure, a rep change, a competitor move, a new product that came in from an innovative part of the organization in the industry, not necessarily price triggered. And the idea is to confirm the diagnosis with a rep before an actual action item is determined and they go out to try and retrieve that customer. The next one is around improving the speed of the service replies, right? So the idea also here is expediting that, but again, with guardrails, right? So you want to draft answers from your policy that you have in the organization. You want to be able to cite the clause and never invent coverage of what the organization is going to be able to do or promise to the customer without specific guardrails. And so the governance aspects is important. You may be able to set a dollar threshold in terms of what type of promise you're going to make, or be able to escalate anything that could be a compliance or a legal trigger, so that then human intervention is brought in and not crossing a line that you don't want the system to cross. The next one is about the predictive aspect, right? The churn early warning. And this is one that you really want a level 3, right? I mentioned before you have the dichotomy between level 1 and level 3s. And this is where it's really powerful to have a level 3 where you can upload, let's say, 2 years of order history, and then it starts computing your frequency, your breadth of the basket that the customer is buying, your volume, your recency trends, and then it starts flagging account where multiple signals are deteriorating at the same time, right? And so recency by itself, for example, may not be the appropriate flag because there could be seasonality in your book. And so this is why it's important to be able to have a predictive system that can look back and determine signal rather than just looking at snapshots over time, which is what very often we see in organizations, right? They look at year over year, for example, and say, oh, we lost a customer. You could have predicted that earlier if you had the right tools in place, and AI can help in that. So what does it get you? The idea with these AI tools is that if you configure them correctly, then you should be able to get the answers the same day. In that way, imagine the power of every single morning having a solid input on, hey, this customer is potentially likely to churn. Here's the change in signals, right? They're now buying more sporadically. They've been calling less for technical support. You may have a number of signals that if you put in front of the rep and provide them the right context, can really change the outcome for that specific customer. So very powerful stuff. There is a catch, right? None of this can actually happen without setting up the second brain. And I'll pass it on to Armin to cover that.
Yeah, thank you, Enrico. So yeah, maybe let's go to the next slide. I'll try to accelerate things, but this is an important topic. I think, again, going back with the example that I mentioned, different functional team members run analyses, some task with AI, whether you use Claude or something else, right? It's going to yield different answers, right? And the reality is a lot of the kind of official commercial logic, either definitions, the way we do distributor rebates, et cetera, sometimes it's documented, but it lives in some random place or somebody's laptop. Other times it's in somebody's head, right? Or in some random PowerPoint or some customer call that was not recorded, right? And so the issue becomes there's not enough context and it's not organized in a way in enterprises where AI will know where to find that right context given the topic that you're using it for, right? And so this whole concept of a second brain, like software engineers that have been very AI native for the last four or 5 years, or 4 years certainly, they've been using this, right, for their own kind of coding efforts, right, because they know it helps them accelerate the software engineering cycle. But that actually applies to a lot of the commercial analytics that you would use AI for, right? So let me give you an example. If you go to the next slide, some of this is common sense, right? But it includes things like the methodology documents that I talked about, right? It's like, what is your approach for quoting something, right? What is your approach for discounting, right? Like the calculations. Is it gross margin? Is it adjusted gross margin? Is it gross margin post customer investment? What is it? And what teams use what metrics? And actually, what is the formula? Like all these needs to be clearly defined. Decision logs, right? You have 5 meetings with your executive leadership, and in those 5 sequential meetings, you decide on some key things for the company, or you override some previously agreed upon fact. That needs to be logged right? And that the log of these decisions and these changes needs to be accessible by AI, right? The next one is interrelated, right? You need to organize your call transcripts, right? And it's not just recording and sending out the summaries via email, but it's actually summarizing these long call transcripts and putting them in these folders, wherever it is, SharePoint, or you upload it into some system like Obsidian, which I'll talk about later. But you need to organize these in a way that could be easily accessible, easily ingested, and where they can be associated with particular topics and particular domain things in your company, right? Data dictionary is an obvious one, but you also need to have the official kind of hierarchies, cross-system hierarchies and linkages, etc., uploaded. Same thing with watchouts, right? There's going to be key things in commercial organizations where you need to note, document, and store. For example, your pricing team may say, we need to reduce the trade rate for this product from 35% to 20% because that's the average trade rate for this product category in this other channel. The reality is, no, your distributor, who's 20 times bigger than you, may just not carry your product. It's just not worth it for them, right? Or your retailer may not want to compress margin. They just don't do that, right? And they're just going to delist your product, right? And so you need to have these assumptions also tracked somewhere, right? Working memory, we call these sort of handoffs or wrap-ups, right? But every time you use AI, there needs to be some mechanism that sort of wraps up the session that you just used the AI for, and it writes out a small markdown document that sort of summarizes and encapsulates what you talked about. And it goes back into this official vault of things, right? And so think about all this, right? If you've heard the term like knowledge graphs, right? It's very similar, right? You're essentially creating a system where you're organizing all these things that are typically, again, markdown documents, probably the easiest way to store and also retrieve and access. But you're organizing it in a way where AI will know which pieces to pull, and it will also know how these individual pieces in the second brain relate to each other. Okay, and that's really important because then you're automatically starting some exercise with AI, whether it's an actual workflow automation or it's one of the things that Enrico mentioned around the playbooks. It already starts knowing what the right context is, knowing what the right commercial assumptions are, what the market and the customer realities are, et cetera, right?
Yeah. And we've seen a lot of people frustrated using playbooks, like we mentioned before, and being frustrated saying, yeah, the system is giving me something, but it's not good enough, or it's breaking these rules. The reality is very often they have not set this second brain that Armin will explain in detail. So if you don't have this, you won't be able to get the best of your AI solution.
Yeah. And one of the examples, if you go to the next one, one of the examples is like building the actual, we've gone through iterations of the Revify platform, and it's just one aspect of kind of the central enabler for Revify in terms of pricing, analytics, and optimization. But that was built with AI, right? And we're able to do that because we've had a second brain. And by the way, like nowadays, companies, even mid-market companies, it's fairly trivial to build something internally for a web app if you have all your things organized in this way, right? Which is easier said than done. And it's a lot easier for a consultancy of our size to build this digital brain or the second brain. It's a lot harder, obviously, for perhaps a bigger enterprise. But once you do that, that accelerates any AI effort in your company. Like it actually accelerates it like 20-fold or 50-fold, right? Not just in terms of speed, but also accuracy, less rework to be done, et cetera, okay? So maybe we can skip 38. We somewhat talked about that a little bit. Yeah, let's talk about 39, right? For those of you not familiar with skills, Claude was the one that really advertised and popularized skills, and Codex also adopted, right? But think of skills as just a documented SOP or a usable process for anything. It could be analysis, it could be, the example we're given is around price increase letters. Suppose you have 500 distributors that you're trying to send price increase letters, right? You have to send targeted letters based on the products that they're carrying, based on the rebates that they're getting, and maybe some of the trade, right? And maybe different distributors belong to different tiers or different segments, and therefore their price increases are going to be different, right? 2 years ago, this is a highly manual effort putting all this together, right? And teams would spend a month putting together price increase letters. If you have your second brain organized correctly, this can be a one afternoon exercise, but obviously the pricing director will have to review it with his or her team, right? But the point is that can be accelerated greatly through the use of second brain and building these skills where you essentially teach AI to produce this markdown document that acts as a guide for AI to produce a code in a reproducible manner for this specific activity, right? And then next year, when you do a price increase, you can just invoke the same skill and say, hey, I need to do price increase letters for this year's or next quarter's general price increase. Ask me any clarifying questions before you begin your work, but go on and execute, right? And the skill will automatically know where to go in your second brain, where to go in your databases, right? What information to pull, how to aggregate, how to communicate, what language to use, et cetera, right? And the guardrails, 100%, 100%. Yeah. So on the next slide, if you could. So we at Revology, this is actually an understatement. We probably have about 50 or 60 plus skills that we created. There's some skills that AI and Claude in particular has as kind of a kind of built-in skills that help you accelerate things. We have our own custom skills, things like brand and voice, right? Like actual, like the slide that you're looking at, right? Obviously, we had to review it as pricing experts, right? But AI is creating this in the brand, in the official branding template that we have, right? And I encourage you guys to do that for your same company, right? To actually have your PowerPoint template input. And things like pitch decks and proposals, right? We have skills built in for that. So when we talk to a prospective client, the turnaround time on a really well thought out proposal is significantly reduced, right? Same thing with content. We write a lot of content and we've written a bunch of white papers, research materials. We have a ton of code that we've done for price elasticity modeling, customer segmentation, price value mapping, et cetera, right? Like we're writing content off of that code. And we have skills that do that. Of course, we review it as humans to make sure that it's valid and make sure that it doesn't sound like a robot wrote it, but there's skills that accelerate the effort, right? Same thing with some of the client delivery processes, right? Follow-ups, status reports, executive status decks, knowledge. We talked about the wrap-up, right? We talked about this idea of when you use AI, you need to wrap up a session and you need to store that in some central repository, whether it's a document management system in the cloud like Obsidian perhaps, or in SharePoint or Google Drive, right? But every time you use it, you need to instruct AI to automatically wrap up that session and write out key updates of what you discussed, key updates of things that you've told AI that are wrong and that it needs to think differently about, right? All that will be documented and timestamped so that it becomes the truth as you use things going forward, okay? Yeah, maybe the next one. Again, a bit of an understatement. We have way more than 90 plus methodology docs. I think this is maybe...
It's outdated already. It changes on a daily basis.
No, I think this is literally just one. I think this is one example engagement where we had 100 methodology docs, just different iterations. We had 70, 80 decision records of the clients, right? Sometimes conflicting decision records, but at least we have a very clear time series view of what we've decided, what we've agreed to change, et cetera, et cetera. Again, one of the examples is we ran an analysis, some optimization or forecasting analysis, that the AI caught itself midstream as it was doing the work and says, oh, no, I'm actually overstating revenue because of this one thing that you've agreed with the client not to make that assumption, but make this other assumption, right? And it was able to look it up from the second brain on what that was, and midstream it corrected itself, right? And this is the reason this thing is useful. If you go to the next slide, this is maybe, it's a very high level view of what our second brain structure may look like. This is a watered down version, but we have these central vaults, right? Every client has its own folder, right? Prospective clients have their own folder, right? We have content folders as well, right? We have some intellectual property things like methodologies and code and case studies and white papers, right? And then we have, again, reference materials, right? So think of these as folders, and each of these folders, there's dozens of subfolders, and each of those contain lots of these markdown documents that essentially encode what our assumptions are, what we talked about. Okay.
Yeah. And feel free to use AI to generate this for you, right? You can take a screenshot of this and then go to Claude or ChatGPT, say, hey, I want to replicate this so that I can create my second brain, guide me through how to make it happen.
Yeah,
Right? And he would
exactly.
do it.
Yeah, each one of our projects. So as you can imagine, both at Revology and Revify, we work on, and at a given point, we probably have three active projects, right? Each project has a markdown file for Claude. It also has them for agents, right? For each project, we instruct Claude on where to look up information in our digital brain, where to look up the assumptions, where to look up the prior decision logs, et cetera, right? We also have detailed context files, right? Anything from stakeholders and what the deliverables are and what the phases of the project is and who is doing the work and who is the client stakeholder for each of these phases that is corresponding with their own project team, et cetera, et cetera. All that is neatly organized. So when we use AI to help accelerate some of these work streams, or we have a key question that we just simply don't remember because we've discussed it 5 weeks ago in a certain call, it is able to retrieve that accurately within split seconds. Okay. Go to the next one, maybe. We have these register files, again, part of the second brain where we have, think of these as documents, right, or files, right? But for every engagement that we do, we have entity details, right? Again, I talked about what is the current phase that we're in, right? What is the status of each work stream, task, and subtask? What was the last activity? Details on people, details on stakeholders, details on the methodologies, right? Maybe we use the double machine learning model for this engagement, and these are the assumptions that we made, and these are the changes that we made to the baseline model versus what we typically use. Maybe for this other engagement, we used some form of Bayesian modeling. And this is the reason we decided to do that, right? This is the parameters and the interesting kind of nuances about the client and the transactional data in the marketplace, which force us to make this decision, right? But again, all that is part of a second brain. So when you're dealing with the next client, that looks very similar to this previous client that we worked on in terms of just the transactional volume and trends and the market dynamics, et cetera, we'll know that this is the right modeling to use, right? And that just simply accelerates just a lot of the testing that you would typically do with some of the price elasticity models that have been built in the past, right? Okay. And then maybe the last one before I'll just pass it on to Enrico. So again, this is that wrap up that I talked about, right? When we work on a project, and in your case, if you work on a project for your own internal company, let's say you're working on some price optimization opportunity, right? You're using AI, you want to wrap up that session, which is this third piece, right? So writes that wrap up. So the next time you want to revisit, let's say you go home, get some good sleep, come back tomorrow, you want to continue working on the project. Guess what? You can just resume where you left off, and it automatically ingests the context. And the beauty of that is, even though AI has lots of context nowadays, one, it's starting to drift away from the truth, right? Once your context is approaching the maximum of the context window. Number one. Number two, you can actually use this across dozens, many different sessions, right? Because it's keeping track of what your work is, and it's keeping track of key facts, right? That it can basically understand for each and every session, understand what the latest status is, what the latest assumptions are, et cetera, and it continually refines itself, right? And this way you can work on a very, very massive project with lots of different iterative stages, and you're ensuring that what you're getting is, if not 100% the truth, it is substantially closer to the truth than if you did it without this, right? So again, just know that you need to wrap up your work and leverage it as you build in an iterative session, right? So that's roughly the primary and the second brain. Very boring and very kind of menial and tactical. Guys, it is incredibly important. So if your company is using AI or is thinking about using AI, you need to set up a digital brain for your company. Otherwise, there's a good chance chaos will ensue. All right, I'll pass it back to you, Enrico.
And the frustrations with AI, I think we all have had frustrations with AI where it hallucinates, or it seems like you're going around in circles and then you're out of context. So this actually allows you to get the best out of AI in the current form. Okay, let's wrap it up. So we got about 5 minutes left. So here's an example of an actual customer that we worked with end to end. Of course, this is all sanitized, and we don't have any confidential information that we're sharing, including the actual customer name. But the idea was, it was a mid-market agricultural input manufacturer and distributor, roughly $80 million of sales, 30% gross margin, and 3,000 customers and about 300 active SKUs. And the situation that the CFO was frustrated with was, hey, I keep on seeing my gross margin deteriorating, and I'm not getting clear answers as to what is driving that and what I can do about it. And what we've done is, exactly as Armin mentioned, we put in the 6 portions of the second brain in AI to be able to create the right infrastructure and decisions. And so, for example, one of the things that we found was that the ERP had 3 different margin fields, and no one could agree on which one was the correct one to use, right? Everyone used a different one. This is a great opportunity to put in your decision logs what are the right decisions and what are the methodology so that you can institutionalize a way of looking at the business across the organization that AI can use. The same applies for the freight logic, the rebate ladder, the dealer call information, and the ad hoc deals that were made with dealers for specific lots of volume that were sold to them. So the idea is all of this goes into the second brain so that you can actually start with a much solid foundation for your analysis. Then the question is, you laid out in the same information storage that Armin mentioned that you see on the left-hand side. But then on the right-hand side, you actually see the people that already were in the organization, right? That doesn't change. Those headcounts are still there. They are spending a way less time analyzing and digesting this data and arguing, to be honest, as to who has the right number and why a certain number doesn't tie with what they have. But the idea is that you can actually dramatically save the amount of time that the team is spending on analysis without having to budget for new software or tools, right? This is really about better organization, using AI that you probably already have at your disposal, and having a disciplined and smart approach to be able to leverage it, okay? So the first 90 days at this customer were basically, the first 4 weeks was painfully setting up the right infrastructure, right? So setting up automatic transcripts for the dealer calls, setting up the data methodology, agreeing on definitions and so on. Sometimes that takes less time if the company is already disciplined around it. In this case, it took about 30 days to set that up. Then you actually start creating your decision log and start documenting which decisions are taken and why. And then this allows you to basically create the playbooks that we had discussed earlier. And then lastly, that's where you really start going for the wins, right? We had some quick wins in the middle portion of the page where you start identifying areas which are just low-hanging fruit and just leakage. But then the biggest benefit you start getting towards the end of the 3 months, where you actually start using this to expedite and improve the quality of your business, where you can then have the organization say, okay, now we have this under control, where should we focus next? Okay. And so from the opportunity standpoint, the exciting part is we identified nearly $12 million of upside across the pricing, churn, cross-sell, and it was much broader than just looking in isolation at the pricing opportunity, which is what pricing consultants typically just look at myopically, right? So the opportunity was much bigger than what just the pricing play would have been. And the CFO was happy because they finally had the answer that they were looking for to say, now we identified what were the key reasons why margin were dropping, which were around discount creep, mix shift, and off-contract pricing gives that they were able to go back and put in some stronger policies around. And then you have the plays, right? Once you have the recommended moves, the humans approve which moves to implement. And they had over 8 million, nearly $9 million of analyst vetted and then human approved plays to go out and get and retrieve back for the organization. So a huge win. And then the actual implementation, and you can use AI to expedite the actual execution of it to be able to get that surgical implementation and tracking for those results. So very efficient, very quick, something that, as Armin mentioned 2 years ago, would not have been possible. So now we have time. Let me just wrap up. Again, as we started off, we have 2 companies that we're running. Revology, which I would consider the white glove provider for expertise around commercial effectiveness and pricing execution, which is industry agnostic. So we've done projects in food, CPG, pharma, industrial, chemicals, you name it, a lot of depth of experience there. And then Revify, which is a newer company, which is focused on mid-cap, so small to medium companies in distribution and manufacturing, bringing you basically the experience of a pricing team without having to build one for yourselves. So we hope this was useful. We want to be sensitive to your time, and so we'll wrap up now. Any questions, Armin, that we haven't covered in the call?
We have a couple of questions, but I think we'll just include that in the email because I see people going off back to work.
Everyone is back to back.
Yep. We'll follow up. Guys, thank you so much for attending. Appreciate your time. We'll follow up with the materials and the playbooks. Reach out to us if you have any questions.
Perfect. Thanks for coming. Nice seeing you. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.